Get the maintenance guy out of here before he breaks something else. The shout cracked across the control room so loudly that even the warning alarms seemed to hesitate for a second. 35 engineers stood around the Atlas 9 production system, a machine worth more than most people would earn in 100 lifetimes, and not one of them could bring it back to life. Screens flashed red. Status monitors blinked with urgent warnings. A digital clock mounted above the main console counted down relentlessly. 11 minutes and 43 seconds remained before the company missed the largest manufacturing deadline in its history. The room buzzed with tension, frustration, and fear. Men and women in expensive suits exchanged nervous looks. Senior engineers whispered theories. Managers checked their phones every few seconds. Yet in the middle of all that noise, one man remained completely still. Ethan Miller stood near the back wall holding a simple toolbox in one hand. His gray maintenance uniform was clean but worn from years of work. His name tag was slightly faded. Most people in the building walked past him every day without noticing him. They knew the engineers. They knew the executives. They knew the CEO. Nobody remembered the maintenance guy. "We're running out of time," Victor Hale snapped as he slammed a tablet onto a workstation. As head engineer, he had spent the last 4 hours directing teams, reviewing diagnostics, and issuing commands. Nothing worked. "We already replaced the control modules. We rebooted the system twice. We checked every circuit." He turned and spotted Ethan near the wall. His expression hardened immediately. "What are you doing here?" Ethan answered calmly. "I was asked to inspect the cooling corridor." A few engineers laughed. Victor shook his head. "The cooling corridor isn't the problem. This is engineering work." More laughter followed. Ethan simply nodded. He had learned long ago that some people needed noise to feel important. Across the room, the main doors opened. A young girl stepped inside carrying a small lunch bag decorated with blue stars. She couldn't have been older than 9. Her blonde hair was tied back in a simple ponytail. "Daddy," she called softly. Ethan turned immediately. His expression changed the moment he saw her. The tension disappeared from his face. "Hey, Lily." The girl hurried across the room. Several executives frowned at the interruption, but Ethan knelt and accepted the lunch bag with a grateful smile. "You forgot this again," Lily said. "I know. That's the 3rd time this month." Ethan laughed quietly. "Then I guess I need a better memory." Lily smiled, but the smile faded when she noticed the way people were looking at her father. She heard the whispers. She saw the smirks. Even at 9 years old, she understood when someone was being treated as if they didn't belong. Near the center of the room, a giant display suddenly flashed another warning. "System failure imminent." Several engineers rushed toward the console. Victor cursed under his breath. One manager removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Another checked the countdown clock. 10 minutes and 52 seconds. The atmosphere tightened further. Then the main entrance opened again. Silence spread almost instantly. Claire Whitmore walked into the room. The CEO of Whitmore Technologies moved with calm confidence despite the chaos surrounding her. She was known throughout the industry for saving struggling companies and turning impossible situations into success stories. But today, even she looked worried. Her eyes swept across the room, taking in every flashing screen and anxious face. "Status?" she asked. Victor stepped forward. "We're close." Claire looked at him carefully. "You've been close for 4 hours." Nobody responded. The silence spoke for itself. Claire glanced toward the countdown clock. 10 minutes and 12 seconds. Then her gaze shifted toward Ethan and Lily standing quietly near the wall. For a moment, she seemed puzzled by their presence. Victor followed her eyes and immediately frowned. "Don't worry about them," he said. "He's just maintenance." Ethan didn't react. He simply stood beside his daughter, holding her lunch bag. Claire looked back at the failing machine. The warning alarms continued their steady rhythm. The lights reflected across the polished floor like flashes of distant lightning before a storm. Everyone in the room stared at Atlas 9 as if willing it to come back to life. Nobody noticed Ethan's eyes narrow slightly. Nobody noticed him listening instead of looking. And nobody realized that while 35 engineers were searching the screens for answers, the maintenance man in the corner had just heard something that didn't belong. The sound was almost impossible to hear. A faint metallic pulse hidden beneath the alarms, beneath the frantic voices, beneath the hum of cooling fans working overtime. Ethan tilted his head slightly. Once, then again. Most people in the room were staring at screens. Ethan was listening. 9 minutes and 40 seconds, one manager announced. His voice cracked under pressure. Another engineer hurried toward Victor carrying a stack of diagnostic reports. We found another error chain. Victor grabbed the papers. Then fix it. We tried. Try again. The engineer stepped back without another word. The room felt smaller with every passing second. Fear had a way of shrinking even the largest spaces. Claire remained near the center console. Her arms were folded. Her expression was calm on the surface, but her eyes revealed the truth. Atlas 9 was not just another machine. It represented years of development, thousands of jobs, and contracts that supplied critical medical technology across the country. If the deadline failed, entire production schedules would collapse. Around her, executives whispered quietly. Lawyers checked messages. Investors waited for updates. Nobody noticed Lily standing beside her father. The little girl studied the room with curious eyes. She saw adults in expensive suits acting more nervous than children before a school exam. Finally, she tugged gently on Ethan's sleeve. Daddy. Yes. Why is everybody so scared? Ethan glanced down at her. Because they care about something important. Lily looked toward the giant machine visible through the glass observation wall. Massive steel housings reflected the flashing emergency lights. Conveyor systems sat motionless. Robotic arms remained frozen in place. The entire facility seemed to be holding its breath. Can you fix it? She asked. Ethan smiled softly. Maybe. Then why do they not ask you? For a moment he said nothing. Then he answered with the same calm honesty he always used with his daughter. Sometimes people only listen to the loudest voice in the room. Lily considered that answer carefully. That does not seem very smart. Ethan almost laughed. No, sometimes it is not. Across the room, Victor suddenly pointed toward a monitor. There. Several engineers rushed over. Excitement spread briefly through the control center. One technician typed rapidly. Another adjusted system settings. For a few hopeful seconds, everyone believed they had found the solution. Then the screen flashed red again. System failure active. The hope disappeared instantly. Victor slammed both hands onto the console. Frustration darkened his face. That makes no sense. Claire walked toward him. How many theories have failed now? Victor did not answer immediately. 8. Claire nodded slowly. And how many more do we have? Silence followed. The answer was obvious. Not many. The countdown clock continued its relentless march. 8 minutes and 11 seconds. The fluorescent lights overhead cast long reflections across the polished floor. The air smelled faintly of warm electronics and industrial coolant. Somewhere inside Atlas 9, that strange metallic pulse continued. Tick, tick, tick. Ethan listened again. His eyes narrowed. Something about the rhythm felt familiar. Not the sound itself. The absence between sounds. Like a musician noticing one missing note in an orchestra. He stepped slightly closer to the observation glass. Lily followed. Beyond the glass stood the enormous machine that everyone feared. Most people saw complexity. Ethan saw a story. Every machine told one if you listened carefully enough. The engineers saw software. Ethan heard mechanics. They saw error codes. He heard timing. They saw symptoms. He listened for causes. Another pulse echoed faintly through the structure. Tick. Then a pause. Then another. Ethan's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not surprise. Recognition. The kind that comes when a forgotten memory suddenly returns. Years ago he had spent countless nights studying systems like this. Long before maintenance uniforms. Long before second jobs. Long before learning how to braid Lily's hair before school every morning. Long before becoming the quiet man everyone overlooked. Claire noticed him moving toward the glass. She watched for a moment before speaking. Mr. Miller? Ethan turned. Several heads followed her gaze. Victor looked irritated immediately. What now? Claire ignored him. You seem interested in something. Ethan glanced back toward Atlas 9. Can I ask a question? Victor rolled his eyes. This is not the time. Claire held up a hand. Let him ask. The room grew quiet. Ethan looked directly at the machine. When did the sound start? Victor laughed. The sound? Yes. What sound? Ethan listened once more. Tick. Pause. Tick. Then he finally looked back at them. His voice remained calm. Quiet. Certain. The one telling us exactly what is wrong. For a moment nobody spoke. The alarms continued. The countdown clock continued. Yet the entire room seemed frozen around Ethan's question. Victor stared at him as if he had just suggested fixing a hurricane with a screwdriver. A sound. Victor said, "We are dealing with one of the most advanced manufacturing systems in the country, and you think the answer is a sound?" Several engineers exchanged uncertain glances. A few smirked. Others looked too exhausted to laugh. Ethan remained calm. Machines talk. Victor folded his arms. Machines do not talk. They do if you spend enough years listening. Claire's eyes remained fixed on Ethan. There was no arrogance in his voice. No attempt to impress anyone. He sounded like a man describing the weather. Simple. Certain. Honest. The countdown reached 7 minutes and 22 seconds. One executive stepped forward nervously. "Claire, we need to make a decision. If Atlas 9 stays offline much longer, we will have to notify the hospitals." Another executive nodded. "The production schedule is already collapsing." Claire never looked away from Ethan. "Tell me about the sound." Victor sighed dramatically. "Claire, with respect, this is ridiculous." She raised one hand. Silence followed instantly. "Tell me about the sound, Mr. Miller." Ethan turned toward the observation glass again. Beyond it, Atlas 9 sat motionless beneath rows of industrial lights. Steel frames stretched nearly 100 feet across the production floor. Conveyor systems wound through the facility like rivers of metal. Thousands of sensors monitored every process. Yet Ethan seemed focused on none of those things. Instead, he listened. Tick. Pause. Tick. Pause. Tick. His eyes narrowed slightly. That rhythm is wrong. Victor threw his hands into the air. Of course it is wrong. The machine is failing. No. Ethan shook his head. The rhythm itself is wrong. Claire stepped closer. Explain. Ethan pointed toward the center section of Atlas 9. The cooling transfer assembly. Several engineers frowned. One pulled up a schematic. Another zoomed into the relevant section. Victor immediately shook his head. Impossible. We checked that system twice. Ethan nodded. I know. Then why mention it? Ethan looked at the screen. Because the cooling assembly is not causing the failure. Victor smirked. Exactly. Ethan continued. It is reporting the failure. The smirk disappeared. A quiet murmur spread across the room. Claire glanced at the schematic. What does that mean? Ethan stepped closer to the display. Lily followed beside him, watching proudly. The sound is not a cooling issue. It is a timing issue. Several engineers stared at him. One older technician suddenly leaned forward. Wait. Everyone turned toward him. The technician adjusted his glasses. Timing pulse feedback. Ethan nodded. Exactly. The technician's expression changed immediately. I have not heard anyone mention that in years. Victor looked irritated. What are you talking about? The technician pointed toward the schematic. Atlas 9 uses an old synchronization safeguard. Most people do not even know it exists. Ethan smiled slightly. Because it is hidden behind 3 software layers. Claire studied both men carefully. And Ethan looked back toward the machine. If the timing pulse falls out of sequence, Atlas 9 assumes there is a critical alignment failure and locks itself down. Victor shook his head. That system was retired during version upgrades. Ethan looked at him. The software was updated. He paused. The hardware was not. Silence spread across the room. The older technician slowly sat back in his chair. Good Lord. Claire noticed the change immediately. What? The technician swallowed. He might be right. Victor opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Because for the first time all day, someone had offered an explanation that actually matched the symptoms. The countdown reached 6 minutes and 4 seconds. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody smirked anymore. Even the executives were listening now. Ethan walked closer to the observation glass. The alarms continued flashing across Atlas 9. Tick. Pause. Tick. Pause. Tick. He listened one final time. Then he looked directly at Claire. His voice remained quiet, but every person in the room heard it clearly. The problem is not where everyone is looking. Claire held his gaze. Then where is it? Ethan pointed toward a narrow service corridor hidden behind the main production chamber. Most people had not even noticed it existed. Back there. Victor stared. That compartment has not been opened in years. Ethan nodded slowly. That is exactly why we should start there. Nobody moved at first. The service corridor Ethan had pointed to sat hidden behind layers of steel framework and protective panels. Most of the people in the room had probably walked past its access door hundreds of times without giving it a second thought. Victor stared at the schematic on the monitor and shook his head. That compartment is obsolete. Ethan remained calm. The machine does not know that. Claire looked from the screen to Ethan. How long would it take to check? One engineer answered immediately. Less than 2 minutes. Victor frowned. We already know the failure is happening in the primary control network. Ethan glanced toward him. Do we? The question landed harder than anyone expected. Not because it was aggressive, because it was honest. For 4 hours the engineering team had been chasing theories. For 4 hours none of those theories had worked. The countdown clock continued falling. 5 minutes and 38 seconds remained. Claire made her decision. Open the corridor. Victor exhaled sharply. Claire. She did not raise her voice. She did not argue. Open it. The room instantly shifted into motion. 2 technicians hurried toward the production floor. Security badges flashed beneath scanners. Heavy access doors released with a metallic click. Through the observation glass, everyone watched the technicians disappear into the narrow maintenance passage hidden behind Atlas 9. Lily stood beside her father and squeezed his hand. They listened. Ethan smiled softly. Looks like they did. The little girl looked proud. Not surprised. Proud. As if she had always known this moment would come. The control room fell into an uneasy silence. No one was laughing now. No one was checking phones. Every eye remained fixed on the live camera feed streaming from inside the corridor. Dust coated the walls. Emergency lights cast faint amber reflections across aging equipment. Pipes, cables, and service conduits stretched into the distance. One technician spoke through his headset. I have reached the synchronization chamber. Ethan's expression remained unchanged. Claire noticed. Everyone else looked nervous. Ethan looked like a man listening to a familiar song. What do you see? Claire asked. The technician aimed his flashlight deeper into the compartment. For a second, nothing appeared unusual. Then he stopped moving. Wait. The entire room froze. Victor stepped closer to the monitor. What is it? The technician crouched near a small metal housing mounted beneath a support frame. This should not be here. Another technician moved beside him. What are you looking at? The first technician wiped away years of dust with his glove. Beneath the dust sat a tiny mechanical assembly connected to a timing relay system. One of the engineers in the control room suddenly leaned forward. No way. Claire turned toward him. What? The engineer pointed at the screen. That component was never supposed to remain active. Ethan nodded quietly. The engineer continued. During the software modernization project, that relay should have been bypassed. Victor looked confused. What does that mean? The older technician who had recognized Ethan's explanation earlier answered. It means Atlas 9 has been listening to an outdated synchronization signal this entire time. Silence followed. The countdown clock reached 4 minutes and 49 seconds. Claire stared at the monitor. Can that relay shut down the machine? Yes, the technician answered immediately. If the timing sequence drifts even slightly. Another engineer quickly opened archived design files. Pages of old documentation appeared on multiple screens. Most employees had never seen them before. The files were more than a decade old. Layer after layer of forgotten engineering history filled the monitors. Then one engineer stopped scrolling. Found it. Everyone gathered around. A yellow design note appeared on screen. Handwritten annotations covered the margins. Technical calculations stretched across several pages. Claire studied the document carefully. Near the bottom sat a set of initials. Ethan saw them immediately. So did the older technician. Victor blinked. Once. Then again. He said quietly. The older technician looked toward Ethan. A strange expression crossed his face. Recognition. Respect. Shock. That relay system, he whispered. You designed it. The room became completely still. Even the alarms seemed distant now. Claire slowly turned toward Ethan. For the first time since entering the control room, she was not looking at a maintenance worker. She was looking at a man carrying a secret nobody had bothered to ask about. Ethan glanced down briefly at Lily. Then he looked back toward Atlas 9. His voice remained as calm as ever. The relay is not broken. Claire held her breath. Then what is? Ethan watched the live camera feed carefully. The technicians were still examining the synchronization chamber. Finally, he pointed toward a tiny steel cover hidden behind the relay assembly. Remove that panel. The technician reached for the cover. Victor frowned. What is behind it? Ethan listened once more to the faint rhythm echoing through the machine. Tick. Pause. Tick. Then he answered quietly. The real problem. The technician reached behind the relay assembly and carefully loosened the small steel cover. Years of dust drifted into the beam of his flashlight. Everyone in the control room leaned forward. The countdown clock dropped to 4 minutes and 2 seconds. No one spoke. No one moved. Even Victor remained silent now. The cover finally came free. The technician aimed his light inside the compartment. For a moment, he saw nothing unusual. Then his eyes widened. You have got to be kidding me. Claire stepped closer to the monitor. What is it? The technician shook his head slowly. A manual synchronization switch. The older engineer immediately stood up from his chair. That is impossible. Apparently not. The technician adjusted the camera for a better angle. Hidden deep inside the compartment sat a small mechanical selector no larger than a deck of cards. A thin layer of corrosion covered part of its housing. One tiny indicator sat halfway between two positions. Not fully engaged. Not fully disengaged. Stuck in between. Ethan nodded almost immediately. The sound he had been hearing suddenly made perfect sense. Tick. Pause. Tick. Pause. The machine was trying to synchronize through two different timing references at the same time. The relay was not failing. It was confused. Can that switch cause the shutdown? Claire asked. The older engineer answered before anyone else could. Absolutely. He looked stunned. The system would interpret that as a critical timing conflict. Victor stared at the screen. Then why did none of our diagnostics catch it? Ethan answered quietly. Because software cannot report a mechanical position it cannot see. The words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. 4 hours of analysis. Hundreds of pages of data. 35 engineers. Yet the real problem had been hiding behind a forgotten panel nobody bothered to inspect. Lily looked up at her father. You knew? Ethan smiled softly. I suspected. Because of the sound? Because of the silence between the sounds. Lily nodded as if that explanation made perfect sense. Somehow it did. The countdown reached 3 minutes and 27 seconds. Claire turned toward the technician inside the corridor. Can you move the switch? The technician examined it closely. Maybe. It is partially seized. Victor immediately shook his head. If that switch breaks, we could lose the entire synchronization system. Claire looked toward Ethan. What do you think? The room followed her gaze. It was a strange moment. Just an hour earlier, nobody cared what Ethan thought. Now the most powerful people in the company were waiting for his answer. Ethan studied the live feed carefully. His expression remained thoughtful, calm, focused. Do not force it. The technician pulled his hand back. Then what? Ethan listened again. Tick. Pause. Tick. The rhythm was weaker now, almost strained, like a clock struggling to keep time. He closed his eyes briefly. A memory surfaced. Long nights. Design reviews. Whiteboards filled with sketches. A younger version of himself arguing that critical systems should always include a manual override. Most people had disagreed. He had insisted, not because he expected perfection, because he expected reality. Machines were built by people, and people sometimes forgot things. His eyes opened. There should be a secondary release tab beneath the switch housing. The technician lowered his flashlight. Wait. He knelt closer. A few seconds passed. Then he laughed in disbelief. There is. Several engineers exchanged stunned looks. Victor said nothing. Claire noticed. The technician brushed away more dust. Hidden beneath the housing sat a tiny recessed latch almost invisible to the naked eye. I see it. Ethan nodded. Press the latch first. Then move the selector fully clockwise. The countdown clock reached 2 minutes and 48 seconds. The control room had become completely silent. The alarms still flashed. The monitors still glowed red. Yet nobody was paying attention to them anymore. Every eye remained fixed on one maintenance worker and one forgotten switch. The technician positioned his hand carefully. Ready. Claire took a slow breath. Do it. The latch clicked. A sharp metallic sound echoed through the corridor. Then the selector moved. 1 inch. 2 inches. Finally, it locked firmly into place. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then somewhere deep inside, Atlas 9, the strange ticking sound vanished. Completely. Ethan heard it first. His shoulders relaxed. Lily noticed immediately. Daddy. He smiled. Now we wait. And all across the control room, Dozens of people held their breath as the giant machine decided what it would do next. 1 second passed, then 2, then 3. Nobody dared speak. The countdown clock continued falling toward disaster. 2 minutes and 27 seconds remained. The red warning lights still flashed across the control room. The giant production system remained motionless. Several executives exchanged worried looks. One manager quietly lowered his head as if preparing for the worst. Victor folded his arms and stared at the monitors. He wanted to believe the adjustment had worked. He also wanted to believe it had not. Because if it worked, then every assumption he had made that day would be exposed. Claire stood perfectly still. Her attention never left the status display. Beside her, Ethan remained calm. Not hopeful, not nervous, simply patient. Lily looked up at him. "How long does it take?" she whispered. Ethan smiled softly. "Good systems think before they move." The little girl nodded seriously. Then, from somewhere deep inside the production floor, a faint sound echoed through the building. A click, then another. Several engineers immediately turned toward the observation glass. Another sound followed. A low mechanical hum. One monitor flickered, then another. A yellow warning disappeared from the screen. An engineer blinked. Did that just clear? Nobody answered. A second warning vanished. Then a third. The room seemed to lean forward all at once. Across the production floor, dormant conveyor systems began running internal checks. Small indicator lights changed from red to amber. The giant machine was waking up. Slowly, carefully, deliberately. The technician inside the service corridor looked back toward the camera feed. "I am seeing activity." The older engineer nearly jumped from his chair. His hands moved rapidly across a keyboard. Data streamed down multiple screens. Synchronization is returning. Another engineer looked at his monitor. Timing conflicts are disappearing. A third engineer checked system diagnostics. Control channels are stabilizing. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Hope entered the room for the first time all day. But Ethan's eyes remained focused on the largest display. He was still listening. The hum continued building. Smooth, consistent, clean. The missing rhythm was gone. The machine finally sounded healthy again. Then a sharp tone echoed across the control room. Everyone froze. System recovery in progress. The message appeared on every screen simultaneously. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed. A few seconds later, another message appeared. Primary synchronization restored. The room erupted. Engineers shouted. Managers laughed. Executives clapped each other on the shoulders. Relief washed through the building like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The countdown clock still showed 1 minute and 48 seconds. They had made it. Claire exhaled slowly. It was the first time all day anyone had seen her relax. Yet while everyone celebrated, Ethan simply picked up his lunch bag. Lily smiled as if the outcome had never been in doubt. "You fixed it." Ethan shook his head gently. "The machine fixed itself." Lily giggled. "That is not true." Nearby, Victor stared silently at the monitors. His face had gone pale. The older engineer walked over to him. "You know what this means?" Victor did not answer. He solved in minutes what 35 of us missed all day. Across the room, another engineer was reviewing archived design documents. Suddenly, he stopped scrolling. His eyes widened. "Claire." She turned toward him. "What is it?" He pointed at the screen. "You need to see this." Claire walked over. Several others gathered around. The document displayed the original Atlas synchronization architecture. Design notes filled the margins. Engineering approvals stretched across multiple pages. Near the top sat a project heading. Below it appeared the name of the lead systems architect. The room fell silent again. Claire read the name once, then twice. Ethan Miller. She looked up immediately. So did everyone else. Maintenance worker. Single father. Quiet man in a faded uniform. Lead architect. The words did not seem capable of belonging to the same person. Victor stared at the screen in disbelief. "No." The engineer opened another document. Then another. Patent records. Design approvals. Development reports. The same name appeared again and again. Ethan Miller. Claire slowly turned toward the man standing beside his daughter. "You built part of this system." Ethan looked toward the display. For a moment his eyes reflected memories no one else could see. Long nights. Ambitious dreams. A different life. Then he nodded once. "A long time ago." Complete silence settled over the room. Not the silence of confusion. Not the silence of fear. The silence of respect. And for the first time that day, every person in the building finally saw the man they had overlooked. For several seconds, nobody knew what to say. The celebration that had filled the room only moments earlier faded into a different kind of silence. It was not the silence of crisis. It was the silence that comes when assumptions collapse. Claire looked at the documents again, then at Ethan, then back at the documents. The dates stretched back more than a decade. The signatures matched. The engineering records matched. Every major synchronization component carried his name somewhere in its history. Yet the man standing before her wore a maintenance uniform and carried a lunch bag decorated with blue stars. The contrast felt impossible. Why? Claire finally asked. Ethan looked at her. Why what? Why are you working maintenance? The room remained still. Even Victor seemed unable to look away. Ethan glanced toward Lily. The little girl stood beside him quietly, holding his hand. A gentle smile touched his face. Life changes. Claire waited. So did everyone else. Ethan was not a man who volunteered attention. His words came carefully, like someone placing tools back into a toolbox after years of practice. 12 years ago, my wife became sick. The room grew even quieter. At first, we thought everything would be fine. Then the treatments became longer, more expensive, more complicated. Ethan looked toward the production floor where the giant machine now hummed steadily. Projects turned into hospital visits. Meetings turned into appointments. Deadlines stopped matching. Nobody interrupted. Eventually, I had a choice. He paused briefly. Keep chasing a career or spend every minute I could with my family. Claire lowered her eyes. Ethan continued. I chose my family. The words were simple, yet they carried more weight than any technical explanation he had given all day. Lily squeezed his hand tighter. She had heard parts of the story before. Not all of it, but enough to understand what her father meant. The older engineer slowly removed his glasses. His expression softened. Around the room, people shifted uncomfortably. Not because they disagreed, because they suddenly recognized how little they actually knew about the man they had ignored for years. Victor stared at the floor. His confidence seemed smaller now. Not broken, just quieter. Claire looked at Ethan carefully. And after that, Ethan smiled sadly. After that, being a father became the most important job I ever had. Lily beamed immediately. Several people smiled without meaning to. Ethan continued. The patents stayed. The designs stayed. The titles stayed. He shrugged gently. But Lily needed someone to help with homework, school projects, science fairs, and bad days. The little girl laughed softly. And pancakes. Ethan nodded. And pancakes. A few people chuckled. The tension eased. Not completely, but enough. Claire looked toward the restored production system. You could have worked anywhere. Probably. You could have led companies. Maybe. You could have been running this division. Ethan smiled. Instead, I worked nights. Claire studied him carefully. Do you regret it? The answer came immediately. Not for 1 second. Lily's eyes filled with pride. She looked around the room as if everyone should have already known the answer. For her, the greatest engineer in the building had always just been Dad. Across the room, one executive quietly closed his laptop. Another lowered his phone. The priorities that had seemed enormous an hour earlier suddenly felt different. The older engineer walked toward Ethan. I remember your presentation. Ethan looked surprised. You do? The man nodded. Chicago, 12 years ago. You spent 40 minutes explaining why systems should always leave room for human judgment. Ethan laughed softly. Most people hated that presentation. Most people were wrong. More smiles appeared. The atmosphere continued changing. Respect replaced status. Character replaced titles. Then another engineer called out from a workstation. Claire. She turned. What is it? The engineer pointed toward a newly restored archive file. There is something else you should see. Several monitors refreshed simultaneously. Personnel records appeared on screen. Development histories. Project assignments. Internal recommendations. Claire stepped closer. Her eyes moved quickly across the documents. Then she stopped. Completely. Her expression changed. Not surprised this time. Something deeper. She looked back at Ethan with new understanding. The room waited. Nobody knew what she had found. Claire held the document silently for several seconds before speaking. You did not just help design Atlas. Ethan's expression remained calm. No. Claire swallowed slowly. You created the original architecture that made the entire platform possible. The room fell silent once again. But this time the silence felt different. Because everyone suddenly realized they had not spent years overlooking a talented maintenance worker. They had spent years overlooking the man who made their success possible. The words settled over the room with astonishing weight. Nobody rushed to speak. Nobody hurried to fill the silence. Across the control center, monitors displayed healthy production metrics once again. Atlas 9 continued running smoothly. Conveyor systems moved with quiet precision. Green indicators replaced the sea of red warnings that had dominated the screens only minutes earlier. Yet nobody was looking at the machine anymore. They were looking at Ethan. Claire lowered the document slowly. Why did nobody know this? Ethan smiled faintly. Because nobody asked. A few people looked down immediately. The answer was not cruel. It was not bitter. That somehow made it even harder to hear. Victor shifted uncomfortably beside the engineering station. Throughout the day, he had dismissed Ethan repeatedly. He had laughed. He had questioned him. He had treated him as if his presence barely mattered. Now, every memory seemed to hang in the air between them. Claire glanced through additional files. The deeper she looked, the more astonishing the picture became. Original architecture proposals, early system models, synchronization patents, manufacturing optimization frameworks. Ethan's fingerprints appeared everywhere. Not literally, intellectually. The company's most important breakthroughs traced back to him. One executive finally spoke. If all of this is true, why leave? Ethan looked toward the production floor. The giant machine reflected softly through the glass. Because success and importance are not always the same thing. The room grew quiet again. Ethan continued. When Lily was born, I thought I could balance everything. Family, work, innovation, ambition. He smiled gently. Then life reminded me that time is limited. Lily squeezed his hand. Claire listened carefully. Ethan's voice never carried regret. Only perspective. There are meetings you can reschedule. Contracts you can renegotiate. Opportunities you can replace. He paused. But you cannot replace moments with the people you love. Several executives stared silently at the floor. One manager quietly removed his glasses. Another closed a financial report that suddenly seemed less important than it had 10 minutes earlier. The older engineer nodded slowly. You gave up a remarkable career. Ethan looked at Lily. I gained a remarkable daughter. Lily's smile illuminated the room more effectively than any overhead light. Claire felt something shift inside her. During years of leading companies, she had met brilliant people, competitive people, ambitious people, yet very few carried the quiet confidence standing in front of her now. Ethan had nothing left to prove. That was what made him different. A young engineer suddenly spoke from the back of the room. I studied your papers in graduate school. Heads turned. The young man looked embarrassed. I did not realize it was you. Ethan laughed softly. Most people do not. Another engineer joined. Your synchronization model is still taught in manufacturing programs. A third engineer nodded. Mine too. Soon several voices were speaking at once. Stories emerged from across the room. Textbooks, research papers, training programs, technical conferences. Ethan had influenced careers throughout the industry without knowing it. Or perhaps without caring. Victor remained silent. The celebration around him seemed distant. Finally, he stepped forward. Every conversation stopped. The room watched carefully. Victor looked directly at Ethan. For several seconds, he struggled to find words. Then he took a slow breath. I owe you an apology. Complete silence followed. Ethan said nothing. Victor continued. I judged you before I knew you. He looked down briefly. Actually, I judged you without trying to know you at all. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Victor swallowed. I saw a uniform and assumed that was the entire story. Ethan studied him calmly. There was no anger in his expression. No satisfaction. Only understanding. Victor shook his head. I was wrong. The words seemed difficult for him to say. That was precisely why they mattered. Ethan finally smiled. We all miss things sometimes. Victor laughed quietly. That might be the most generous response I have ever received. Several people smiled. The tension eased again. Outside the control room windows, afternoon sunlight began filtering through the upper glass panels of the facility. Golden reflections stretched across steel walkways and polished floors. The crisis was over. Production had resumed. Contracts had been saved. But something more important had happened. People had started seeing one another differently. Claire looked around the room, then back at Ethan, then at Lily. A decision was beginning to form in her mind. Not about machines. Not about engineering. something much bigger. And as the sunlight settled across the restored facility, she realized the most valuable thing recovered that day was never Atlas 9 at all. It was the truth about the quiet man everyone had overlooked. Claire stood quietly for a long moment as the late afternoon light settled across the control room. The crisis had passed. The machine was running. The contracts were safe. Yet none of those victories seemed to matter as much as the lesson standing in front of her. She looked at Ethan and then at Lily. The little girl was leaning against her father with complete trust, the kind that could never be purchased, negotiated, or earned through status alone. Claire finally spoke. "Ethan, I would like to offer you something." The room immediately grew still. Several executives exchanged curious looks. Ethan smiled politely. "What is it?" Claire took a slow breath. "Any position you want." A murmur spread through the room. Claire continued. "Chief Engineer, Director of Systems, Vice President of Innovation. Name the role." Ethan blinked once. Then he looked down at Lily. The little girl looked back up at him. "That sounds important," she whispered. Ethan laughed softly. "It does." Claire stepped closer. "The company owes much of its success to your work. Frankly, we owe today's success to you as well." Ethan remained silent for a moment. The room waited. Victor waited. The executives waited. Even the engineers who had spent years studying his work waited. Finally, Ethan nodded. "I appreciate that." Claire smiled hopefully. "Then say yes." Ethan glanced through the observation glass toward the production floor. Machines moved steadily beneath the bright lights. Workers returned to their stations. The facility had found its rhythm again. Then he looked at Lily. "What time is your science fair tomorrow?" Lily answered instantly. 6 o'clock. "And who promised to help finish the volcano model tonight?" Lily grinned. "You did." Ethan looked back at Claire. His expression was warm. Respectful. "Certain. Then I cannot stay late." A few people laughed quietly. Claire smiled too, though there was surprise in her eyes. "That is your answer?" Ethan nodded. "My daughter comes first." The room fell silent once more. Not because anyone disagreed. Because everyone suddenly understood. Ethan had spent years making that choice. Every day, every week, every year. He had chosen what mattered most long before anyone recognized his brilliance. Claire folded her arms gently and shook her head with admiration. "You really are impossible." Ethan laughed. "I have heard that before." Victor stepped forward. "For what it is worth, I hope you come back tomorrow." Ethan looked at him. Victor smiled faintly. "The engineers could learn a lot from you." Ethan glanced around the room. Faces that had once ignored him now carried genuine respect. Yet his response remained the same. Maybe they already learned the important part. Victor frowned. "What part?" Ethan looked toward the giant machine. "Do not assume you know everything." The older engineer laughed immediately. Several others joined him. Even Victor smiled. Claire extended her hand. Ethan shook it. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Not for saving the machine. For reminding all of us what matters." Ethan nodded. "You are welcome." The sunlight continued stretching across the floor. The alarms were gone now. The tension was gone. The noise was gone. One by one, conversations resumed throughout the room. People returned to work. Engineers returned to their stations. Executives returned to their meetings. Life moved forward. Yet something had changed. Before leaving, Ethan picked up his toolbox with one hand and Lily's science project supplies with the other. Together, they walked toward the exit. Nobody stopped them. Nobody questioned them. They simply watched. As father and daughter reached the doorway, Lily tugged gently on his sleeve. "Daddy." "Yes." She smiled. "Did you really build all of this?" Ethan looked back at the massive facility. The machines. The lights. The systems. The technology. Then he looked at her. His smile softened. "Not the important parts." Lily tilted her head. "What are the important parts?" Ethan knelt beside her. "The people." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lily wrapped her arms around him. Ethan hugged her back. Through the glass walls behind them, the restored machine continued operating flawlessly. Engineers monitored screens. Production lines moved smoothly. Millions of dollars flowed once again. Yet the most powerful moment in the building happened far from the control panels. It happened beside a doorway, where a father held his daughter and quietly remembered what success truly meant. And as they walked out together into the golden evening light, an extraordinary silence settled across the room behind them. Not the silence of failure. Not the silence of shock. The silence of respect. Because everyone finally understood that the strongest person in the building was never the loudest voice, the highest title, or the smartest engineer. It was the man who never needed recognition to know who he was.